She stood at the entrance of Crown Capital Microfinance Bank's bustling Lekki branch, her weathered hands trembling as they gripped a small cloth bag. The woman wore layers of tattered clothing that had seen better decades, her headscarf pulled low over silver-streaked hair, and her face mapped with lines that spoke of hardship. To anyone passing by, she was invisible, just another Lagos street beggar who had wandered too far into the polished world of marble floors and air conditioning. But beneath that carefully constructed disguise, behind those smudged reading glasses, Madame Clara Mensah watched everything with eyes that had built an empire from nothing. The automatic doors whooshed open, and she shuffled inside, her worn slippers making soft sounds against the gleaming tiles. The banking hall buzzed with Friday afternoon energy, customers queuing at teller windows, account officers typing behind computers, the hum of transactions and impatient sighs filling the air. Clara had personally designed this branch 3 years ago, choosing every fixture, approving every hire. Now she had returned to see if the values she preached in boardrooms actually lived in the hearts of those who wore her company's uniform. At the customer service desk, 3 women sat in crisp white blouses and navy skirts, their name tags catching the fluorescent light: Linda Okafor, Patricia Adeyemi, and Tonia Bassi. They had been chatting about weekend plans when Clara approached, and the conversation died the moment they looked up. Linda's perfectly drawn eyebrows shot upward. Patricia's lips curved into a smirk. Tonia actually leaned back in her chair as if poverty were contagious. "Good afternoon," Clara said softly, her voice deliberately roughened. "I want to open an account. Small account for saving." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Linda exchanged glances with Patricia, and both women struggled to contain their laughter. Tonia didn't bother struggling. She let out a small snort that she quickly tried to disguise as a cough. "Madam, are you sure you're in the right place?" Linda asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is a bank, not a charity organization." Clara's heart clenched, but her face remained neutral. "I know his bank. I have small money to save. My daughter, she sent me something every month from abroad. I want to keep it safe." Patricia leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Sister, with all due respect, opening an account requires minimum balance. You need to have at least 50,000 naira. Do you have that kind of money?" The way she asked made it clear she already knew the answer, and the question itself was merely entertainment for a boring afternoon. Before Clara could respond, a male voice cut through the tension. "Ladies, is there a problem here?" Mr. Frank Obiagu approached from the loans department, his expression concerned. Unlike his colleagues, he looked at the elderly woman with something resembling compassion. "Madam, please, come and sit down. Let's talk properly." Frank pulled out a chair, ignoring the incredulous looks from Linda, Patricia, and Tonia. He sat across from Clara and spoke gently. "What's your name, Ma?" "Clara," she replied, grateful for his kindness even as she noted how the others were whispering behind their hands, their laughter barely suppressed. "Okay, Mama Clara, tell me, how much were you hoping to start with?" Frank's tone carried no judgment, just genuine interest in helping another human being. "I have 15,000 naira now," Clara said, pulling out a worn envelope from her bag. "But my daughter will send more next month. I just want a safe place to keep it." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "We can work with that. Let me check if—" "Frank, what are you doing?" Linda's voice cut across them like a whip. "You're wasting time with this woman. Look at her. She probably picked those notes from the gutter. This is a professional establishment, not a roadside susu box." The other women erupted into giggles, their voices carrying across the hall. Several customers turned to look, some with pity, others with the uncomfortable embarrassment of witnessing cruelty. Clara felt the familiar weight of humiliation settling on her shoulders, not for herself, but for what this revealed about the institution she had built. She had created Crown Capital to serve ordinary Nigerians, to give dignity to small savers and micro-entrepreneurs. Yet here were her own employees, mocking someone who represented exactly the demographic they were meant to empower. Patricia stood up, her arms crossed. "Honestly, Frank, you're too soft. This woman needs to leave before she drives away real customers. Can you imagine what people will think if they see us entertaining beggars?" She turned to Clara, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Madam, please. This place is not for you. Try the community savings down the street. They'll collect even 200 naira. Tonia added fuel to the fire. Or better yet, go to those microfinance banks that operate under the trees. You know, the ones that match your lifestyle. The cruel emphasis on the last word drew more snickers from Linda and Patricia. Frank's jaw tightened. That's enough. She's a potential customer, and we're supposed to. Supposed to what? Linda interrupted, standing now too. Supposed to let every dirty beggar walk in here and waste our time? Frank, sometimes your village mentality shows. This is Lagos. This is business. We have targets to meet, real clients to attend to. She turned to the security guard stationed near the entrance. Musa, please come and escort this woman out. She's disturbing our work environment. The security guard, a middle-aged man who looked distinctly uncomfortable with his assignment, approached slowly. Madam, he said quietly to Clara, I'm sorry, but you have to leave. Clara stood, her movements deliberate and slow. She looked at each woman in turn. Linda with her designer watch and superiority complex. Patricia with her perfectly styled weave and cold eyes. Tonia with her manicured nails and casual cruelty. Then she looked at Frank, whose face reflected genuine distress at what was happening. She nodded at him, a gesture so brief only he caught it, and allowed Musa to guide her toward the exit. As she shuffled out, she heard Patricia's stage whisper behind her. Can you imagine the audacity? Coming into Crown Capital looking like a refused collector and expecting us to open account for her. The nerve. Their laughter followed her through the automatic doors and into the Lagos afternoon heat, where the real Clara Mensah, CEO, philanthropist, and woman who had built a $200 million financial institution from a single kiosk in ABA, allowed herself one moment of profound sadness before reaching for her phone. She dialed her personal assistant. Chioma, she said quietly, her voice now carrying the authority that made board members straighten in their seats. Initiate Protocol 7. Conference Hall. Lekki Branch. 1 hour. Everyone, and I mean everyone, must attend. No exceptions. She ended the call and removed the headscarf, letting the afternoon breeze cool her head. In 60 minutes, 3 women would learn the most expensive lesson of their careers. But one man would discover that kindness, even when overshadowed, never goes unnoticed. The test was complete. The results were devastating. And justice, Clara thought as she climbed into her driver's car parked discreetly down the street, was about to be served cold in an air-conditioned conference room. The afternoon shift at Crown Capital's Lekki branch continued with its usual rhythm, though Linda, Patricia, and Tonia couldn't stop rehashing their entertainment from earlier. They had returned to their desks with the satisfied air of people who believed they had defended their territory against an unwelcome intruder. Linda was touching up her lipstick when Patricia leaned over, still grinning. I swear, the look on her face when Musa was escorting her out. Patricia said, shaking her head. Priceless. Some people just don't know their place in this world. Tonia nodded enthusiastically, typing away at her computer without much focus. Exactly. You have to wonder what goes through their minds. Like, you're wearing rags that probably have bedbugs, and you think you can just walk into a place like this? Please. She paused, then added with mock sympathy. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Linda waved her hand dismissively. Don't waste your emotions. Those kinds of people are professional beggars. They probably make more money than us from sympathetic fools on the street. She was probably testing to see if she could scam us somehow. The 3 women dissolved into another round of giggles, their voices carrying across the banking hall with the careless confidence of people who believe themselves untouchable. Across the room, Frank sat at his desk, his jaw tight as he processed loan applications with unusual intensity. He had worked at Crown Capital for 5 years, rising from a teller position to loans officer through dedication and genuine care for customers. What he had witnessed earlier left a bitter taste in his mouth. The elderly woman had been polite, humble, and sincere, exactly the kind of small savor that Madame Clara Mensah always spoke about in her company-wide addresses. He remembered the CEO's words from the last quarterly meeting. We exist to serve those whom traditional banks have forgotten. Every customer, regardless of how much they deposit, deserves dignity and respect. Yet here were his colleagues, violating that core principle with laughter and scorn. Frank had tried to intervene, tried to show the woman the basic human decency that should have been automatic. But he had been outnumbered, outshouted, and ultimately powerless to prevent her humiliation. The memory of her quiet dignity as she left, the way she had nodded at him with understanding in her eyes, haunted him. He wondered if he should have done more, fought harder, insisted more forcefully. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of activity near the manager's office. Mr. Dominic Okoro, the branch manager, had emerged looking uncharacteristically flustered, his usually composed demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. He was scrolling through his phone with trembling fingers, his face pale beneath his dark skin. Something was wrong, very wrong. Everyone, Mr. Dominic's voice cracked slightly as he called out. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. Everyone, I need your attention immediately. Stop what you're doing. The banking hall quieted gradually. Customers looked up from their transaction slips. Tellers paused mid-count. Account officers stopped typing. Linda, Patricia, and Tonia exchanged curious glances, their earlier mirth fading into confusion. Mr. Dominic never interrupted operations like this unless something serious had happened. I've just received a call from headquarters, Mr. Dominic continued, his voice strained. All staff members are required to report to the conference hall immediately. This is not optional. Tellers, close your stations. Security, redirect customers to our Acadia branch. This is a mandatory emergency meeting. A murmur rippled through the assembled staff. Emergency meetings were rare, usually reserved for crisis situations, major fraud discoveries, regulatory issues, or corporate restructuring announcements. Linda leaned toward Patricia and whispered, "Do you think we're being audited? Maybe that beggar woman was some kind of test customer from the central bank." Patricia's eyes widened. "No way. They always give notice for those things. Maybe it's about the quarterly targets? We've been doing well, though." Despite her words, uncertainty crept into her voice. Tonia bit her lip, her earlier confidence wavering. Whatever it is, it must be serious. Look at Mr. Dominic's face. I've never seen him this shaken. Within 15 minutes, the staff had assembled in the conference hall, a spacious room on the second floor with large windows overlooking Victoria Island's skyline. The table could seat 30 people, and today every chair was filled. Customer service representatives, tellers, loans officers, security personnel, cleaners, and administrators all crowded in, their conversations hushed and speculative. Mr. Dominic stood at the head of the table, constantly checking his watch and his phone, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously every few seconds. Frank sat near the middle, his instincts telling him that whatever was about to happen connected somehow to the incident earlier. He couldn't explain the feeling, just a growing certainty that the elderly woman's humiliation and this emergency summons were not coincidental. He noticed that Linda, Patricia, and Tonia had seated themselves together near the back, their earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by nervous energy. The conference room door opened, and a woman in a sharp black pantsuit entered. Chioma Adebayo, personal assistant to Madame Clara Mensah herself. Everyone recognized her from company newsletters and official visits. Her presence confirmed that this meeting originated from the very top of Crown Capital's hierarchy. Chioma's expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes held something that made several staff members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Good afternoon, everyone," Chioma said crisply. "Thank you for assembling so quickly. Madame Clara Mensah will join us shortly. In the meantime, please ensure your phones are on silent. This meeting is confidential, and no recording of any kind is permitted." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "What you are about to witness is a direct result of decisions made earlier today. Some of you may find the next few minutes uncomfortable. That discomfort is intentional." The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the humming air conditioner. Linda grabbed Patricia's hand under the table, her palm suddenly sweaty. A terrible suspicion was beginning to form in her mind, but she pushed it away. It couldn't be. There was no way. That woman was just a beggar, a nobody. Wasn't she? The door opened again, and two security personnel entered, taking positions on either side. Then came the sound of footsteps in the hallway, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority. Every head turned toward the entrance. Every breath held. And then she walked in. The woman was dressed simply. The same tattered clothes, the same worn headscarf, the same shuffling gait. For a moment, confused silence filled the room. Then recognition hit, like a physical blow. It was the beggar from earlier. The woman they had mocked. The woman they had laughed at. The woman they had thrown out. Linda felt the blood drain from her face. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Tonia's eyes widened so much they seemed ready to pop from their sockets. Around the room, other staff members who had witnessed the earlier scene began to understand, their faces reflecting dawning horror. The woman walked slowly to the head of the conference table, her movements still carrying that deliberate frailty. Then, with theatrical precision, she reached up and removed the headscarf. Silver-streaked hair, normally styled in an elegant updo, fell loosely around her shoulders. She took off the smudged glasses, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She straightened her posture, and suddenly the frailty vanished, replaced by the commanding presence of a woman who had built an empire. "Good afternoon," Madame Clara Mensa said, her voice clear and strong, carrying none of the roughness from earlier. "I believe most of you know who I am. For those who may have forgotten in the last few hours, allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Clara Mensa, founder and CEO of Crown Capital Microfinance Bank, and I have just had the most enlightening afternoon." The silence in the conference room was absolute, the kind of quiet that pressed against eardrums and made hearts pound audibly. Clara stood at the head of the table, still dressed in her disguise, a living contradiction that made the moment surreal. She let the silence stretch, watching as comprehension rippled through the room like a wave of ice water. Some staff members sat frozen, others shifted nervously, and 3 women in the back looked like they might faint. "I founded Crown Capital 23 years ago," Clara began, her voice measured but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "I started with a single wooden desk under a tarpaulin in our area market, ABA. My first customer was a widow who wanted to save 200 naira weekly to buy a sewing machine. I took her money, gave her a handwritten receipt, and promised her that her dreams mattered to me." She paused, letting her eyes scan the room. "That woman eventually bought her sewing machine, then another, then opened a tailoring shop that employed 12 people. She saved with me for 15 years until she passed away last year. And at her funeral, her children told me I had treated their mother with more respect than her own relatives had." Clara's hands rested on the back of the chair before her, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "I built this institution on a single principle, dignity for all. Rich or poor, educated or illiterate, well-dressed or threadbare. Every person who walks through our doors deserves respect. Not because of what they have, but because of who they are. Human beings. Created equal. Worthy of kindness." She moved slowly around the table, her worn slippers making soft sounds against the carpeted floor. Staff members avoided her gaze as she passed, some staring at their hands, others at the table surface. So imagine my disappointment. No, my heartbreak, when I decided to test whether the values I preach actually live in the hearts of my employees. I dressed as you saw me, carried genuine need in my pocket, and walked into this branch seeking to open a simple savings account. Clara stopped behind Linda's chair. The young woman sat rigid, tears already streaming down her face, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Miss Linda Okafor, you've worked here for 3 years. Your file says you're efficient, you meet targets consistently, and customers rarely complain about your service. But this afternoon, when I approached your desk, you looked at me like I was garbage. You laughed at my appearance. You questioned whether I was in the right place, as if banks were palaces reserved only for the wealthy." Linda's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but Clara wasn't finished. She moved to Patricia's chair. "Miss Patricia Adeyemi, 2 years with Crown Capital. Your performance reviews praise your professionalism and attention to detail. Yet today, you mocked my poverty, implied I had picked money from gutters, and suggested I wasn't worthy of being served here. You made a spectacle of my humiliation for your own entertainment." Patricia had gone completely pale, her lips trembling as she struggled to find words that wouldn't come. Clara continued to Tonia's seat. "Miss Tonia Bassi, 18 months with us. Your file mentions your ambition and drive. This afternoon, you laughed loudest. You suggested I visit banks under trees that match my lifestyle. You treated human suffering as comedy, dignity as something earned by wealth rather than granted by virtue of existence." Tonia had buried her face in her hands, her whole body trembling. Around the room, other staff members sat in uncomfortable witness, grateful they hadn't been directly involved but ashamed they hadn't intervened either. Mr. Dominic looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, knowing that as branch manager, this failure reflected directly on his leadership. Then Clara's expression softened slightly as she turned toward Frank's seat. Mr. Frank Obiagu, 5 years with Crown Capital. Your file shows steady growth, consistent performance, and something your colleagues seem to have forgotten, humanity. She walked over to where he sat, and Frank looked up at her with a mixture of relief and residual concern. When everyone else saw a beggar to be mocked, you saw a person to be helped. When your colleagues were competing to deliver the cruelest insult, you offered a chair and spoke with kindness. You tried to find solutions while others were calling security. Frank swallowed hard. Madam, I should have done more. I should have insisted. Clara raised her hand gently. You did what you could in a toxic environment. Sometimes, one voice of decency in a room full of cruelty is all the difference in the world. You reminded me that this institution still has employees who understand what we're really about. She turned back to address the entire room. Frank's kindness today has earned him a promotion. Effective immediately, he will become assistant branch manager, with full authority to reshape customer service protocols and train staff in the values this institution was built upon. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a smattering of applause that died quickly when Clara's expression hardened again. She returned to the head of the table, her voice dropping to something colder. As for Linda, Patricia, Antonia, your employment with Crown Capital Microfinance Bank is terminated, effective immediately. You will surrender your identification cards, clear your desks under supervision, and be escorted from the premises. Your final salaries will be processed according to labor law, but you will receive no references from this institution. The three women erupted into pleas simultaneously. Madam, please. Linda cried out, standing so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please give me another chance. Patricia was weeping openly now. Madam Clara, I have children. My family depends on this job. I made a terrible mistake, but please. Tonia's voice cracked with desperation. It was just a joke. We didn't mean any real harm. Please, madam, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. Clara's face remained impassive, though something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or disappointment that ran deeper than anger. You didn't know who I was, that's true. But that's precisely the point. You should have treated me with respect not because of who I was, but because of who you were supposed to be. Your cruelty wasn't directed at your boss. It was directed at a vulnerable woman who needed help. That makes it worse, not better. She gestured to Chioma, who stepped forward with 3 envelopes. These contain documentation of your termination and information about your exit process. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You have 30 minutes. Clara's voice softened just slightly, enough to let a hint of genuine sorrow through. I take no pleasure in this. I had hoped to find compassion in my staff. Instead, I found exactly what I feared. That success and comfort had made us forget where we came from and who we exist to serve. The security personnel moved forward, and the 3 women stood shakily, their faces blotched with tears and shame. As they filed toward the door, Linda turned back one last time. Madam Clara, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm truly, deeply sorry. Not because you're the CEO, but because you're right. You were a human being who needed help, and I failed you. I failed myself. I failed everything I was raised to believe. Her voice broke completely. I'm so sorry. Clara nodded once, acknowledging the apology without accepting it as redemption. The 3 women left, their footsteps echoing in the hallway, and the door closed behind them with a finality that felt like a judgment being sealed. Clara turned back to the remaining staff, her posture slightly less rigid now. Let this be a lesson to everyone in this room. Wealth means nothing without kindness. Success means nothing without character. You can meet every target, exceed every quota, and still fail at the most basic requirement of this job, treating people with dignity. 3 weeks passed after that devastating afternoon, and life at Crown Capital's Lekki branch gradually returned to its rhythm, though the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Frank had stepped into his new role with quiet determination, implementing training sessions focused on empathy and customer service excellence. Staff members who had witnessed the dramatic revelation approached their work with renewed consciousness, acutely aware that every customer deserved respect regardless of appearance or account balance. The story had spread through all Crown Capital branches like wildfire, becoming a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and used in orientation sessions for new employees. At the headquarters in Victoria Island, Clara sat in her spacious office overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, reviewing quarterly reports. The incident had weighed heavily on her spirit, more than she had anticipated. She had expected to feel vindicated, perhaps even satisfied that justice had been served. Instead, she felt a persistent melancholy, a sense that something remained unfinished. She had exposed cruelty and punished it, yes, but had she actually changed anything? Or had she simply removed 3 people and left the underlying problem untouched? Her assistant Chioma knocked and entered, carrying a stack of mail. "Madam, these arrived by courier this morning. They're marked personal and urgent." Chioma placed 3 envelopes on Clara's desk, each one handwritten with careful, deliberate penmanship. The return addresses made Clara's breath catch: Linda Okafor, Patricia Adeyemi, and Tony Abassi. Clara stared at the envelopes for a long moment before opening the first one. Linda's letter was written on simple lined paper, the kind schoolchildren use, and the ink had smudged in several places where tears had fallen. "Dear Madam Clara Mensah, I have started this letter 20 times and thrown away 19 drafts because no words feel adequate for what I need to say. I know I don't deserve your attention, much less your forgiveness, but I need you to know that what happened that day has broken something in me that needed breaking. For 3 weeks, I have replayed that afternoon in my mind countless times. I see your face, the face I mocked, and I recognize my mother. She died when I was 15, and before she passed, she cleaned houses for wealthy families who often treated her exactly as I treated you. I remember her coming home exhausted, telling me about madams who wouldn't let her use their toilets, who counted their silverware after she left, who spoke about her like she was invisible. I remember promising her that when I became successful, I would never treat anyone that way. Yet there I stood, in my pressed uniform and designer watch, doing exactly what I had hated others for doing to my mother. I had become the very thing I despised, and I didn't even realize it until you removed that headscarf. The shame I felt in that moment wasn't about losing my job. It was about losing myself. Since leaving Crown Capital, I have struggled to find new employment. Every interview reminds me that I cannot provide a reference from my most recent position, and I cannot lie about why. When interviewers ask what happened, I tell them the truth. I tell them I was cruel to someone who needed kindness, and I faced the consequences I deserved. Most thank me for my honesty and show me the door. But something unexpected has happened through this struggle. I have started volunteering at a shelter for homeless women in Surulere. I serve meals, listen to stories, and try in some small way to offer the dignity I denied you. These women have taught me more in 3 weeks than I learned in 3 years of employment. They have shown me that circumstance does not define character, that poverty does not equal worthlessness, and that every person carries invisible burdens we cannot see. I am not writing to ask for my job back. I understand that ship has sailed, and honestly, I needed to lose it to find myself again. I am writing to say thank you. Thank you for caring enough about your institution to test it. Thank you for having the courage to experience humiliation in order to expose it. Thank you for teaching me the hardest lesson of my life. I am sorry, Madam Clara. Truly, deeply sorry. Not because you were the CEO, but because you were a human being who deserved better. With profound regret and gratitude, Linda Okafor. Clara set the letter down, her hand trembling slightly. She reached for Patricia's envelope, breaking the seal with her letter opener. Dearest Madam Clara, I have 3 children, ages 7, 5, and 2. Since losing my job at Crown Capital, I have had to explain to my oldest daughter why mommy stays home now, why we can't afford her art classes anymore, why we're eating rice and stew 4 nights a week instead of the variety we used to enjoy. She asked me if I did something bad, and I had to tell her yes. I told my 7-year-old daughter that mommy was mean to someone who needed help. I told her that I laughed at a woman because she looked poor, and that woman turned out to be someone very important. My daughter looked at me with such confusion and asked, "But mommy, wouldn't it be wrong even if she wasn't important?" Out of the mouths of babes. My own child understood in seconds what I had forgotten in years, that kindness isn't conditional on status, that respect isn't earned by wealth, that humanity is the baseline, not the reward. The truth is, madam, I had become comfortable. My salary was good, my position felt secure, and somewhere along the way, I started seeing customers as transactions rather than people. I developed a hierarchy in my mind. VIP customers who deserved my best service, regular customers who deserved adequate service, and then everyone else who I saw as nuisances interrupting my real work. You weren't a nuisance, Madame Clara. You were a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw reflected in it. The woman who mocked you wasn't who I thought I was, but she was who I had become. That realization has haunted me every single day since. I have been teaching my children differently now. We volunteer together at a food bank on weekends. We talk about privilege and empathy. My daughter asked to give her birthday money to a homeless man we saw outside the market, and I cried because I realized she was becoming the person I should have remained. This letter isn't a job application disguised as an apology. I know I violated everything Crown Capital stands for, and I accept the consequences. But I needed you to know that your test didn't just expose cruelty. It also planted seeds of change. I am different now because of what happened. My children will be different. And maybe, in some small way, that makes the pain worthwhile. I am profoundly sorry for the person I was that day. I am working every day to become someone better. With sincere remorse, Patricia Adeyemi. Clara wiped her eyes before opening the third letter. Tonia's handwriting was less steady. The words crowded together as if written in a rush of emotion. Madame Clara Mensa, I am the youngest of the 3 women you fired, and probably the one who learned the hardest lesson. I am 26 years old, fresh from university with a degree in business administration and an attitude that needed serious adjustment. I grew up poor in Calabar. My father was a fisherman who barely made enough to feed us. I wore secondhand uniforms to school and often went hungry so my younger siblings could eat. I fought my way to university through scholarships and part-time jobs, determined never to be poor again. When I got the job at Crown Capital, I thought I had finally escaped my past. I bought new clothes, changed my accent, and distanced myself from anything that reminded me of where I came from. Clara read the end of Tonia's letter through blurred vision, her heart aching with the weight of genuine transformation she saw in those handwritten words. Tonia had concluded by writing that she had returned to Calabar to reconnect with her family, to remember where she came from, and to volunteer teaching financial literacy to fishermen's children. The young woman who had mocked poverty had returned to embrace it, to serve it, to honor it as the foundation of her own story. For hours, Clara sat with those 3 letters spread across her mahogany desk, reading and rereading them as the Lagos sun tracked across the sky and dipped toward evening. Chioma checked on her twice, bringing tea that went cold and untouched. Finally, as the office filled with golden sunset light, Clara picked up her phone and made a call that would surprise everyone, including herself. Frank, it's Clara Mensa. I need you to arrange something for me. 3 positions, customer service training associates, entry-level, 6-month probationary contracts. They'll work under your direct supervision with weekly evaluations. I'll send you the names. She paused, listening to his surprised silence. Yes, I'm sure. Sometimes grace is harder than judgment, but it's also more powerful. Get the paperwork ready for Monday. When Linda, Patricia, and Tonia received the calls informing them of their reinstatement under strict conditions, each woman broke down in tears of disbelief and gratitude. They would return not to their old positions, but to humbler roles focused on learning, serving, and rebuilding trust from the ground up. Their salaries would be reduced, their authority minimal, and their every action monitored. But they would have a second chance, not because they deserved it, but because Clara believed in redemption more than retribution. The morning they returned, Frank gathered them in a small training room before the branch opened. Listen carefully, he said, his voice kind but firm. Madame Clara didn't bring you back because she's forgotten what happened. She brought you back because she saw something in your letters that convinced her you've learned from it. But understand this, you're on probation not just professionally but morally. Every customer interaction will be evaluated. Every decision will be scrutinized. You'll attend weekly empathy training sessions, role-playing exercises, and community service assignments. This isn't just about keeping a job. It's about becoming the kind of people who deserve to keep it. The 3 women nodded solemnly, their eyes reflecting humility that hadn't existed before. They began their new roles with a consciousness that transformed everything they touched. Linda worked the information desk, greeting every customer with genuine warmth regardless of appearance. Patricia assisted with account openings for small savers, patiently explaining options to market women and Okada riders with the same care she had once reserved for high-net-worth clients. Tonia helped in the customer complaints department, listening with empathy to frustrations and finding solutions with grace. Months passed, and something remarkable happened. The branch's reputation began to change throughout the community. Word spread that Crown Capital Lekki treated everyone with respect, that staff took time to explain banking options to the elderly, that no customer was too small or too poorly dressed to receive excellent service. The branch began attracting customers who had previously avoided banks entirely: small traders, artisans, domestic workers, people who had money to save but had never felt welcome in formal financial institutions. One afternoon in late October, 6 months after the infamous test, the branch doors opened and an elderly man shuffled in. He was thin, his clothes worn but clean, and he carried a wooden box that rattled with the sound of coins. His hands shook with age as he gripped the box, and his eyes held the uncertainty of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Linda was at the information desk when she saw him. For a split second, just a heartbeat, her old instincts flickered. He looked poor, probably had very little money, would take time to serve. Then she remembered another elderly person in worn clothes, remembered her shame, remembered the lesson that had cost her everything and ultimately saved her soul. She stood up immediately, her smile genuine and warm. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Crown Capital. My name is Linda. Please, come and sit down. How can we help you today?" The old man's face showed surprise at her kindness. He had clearly expected to be turned away. "My daughter," he said softly, his voice carrying the tremor of age. "She has been sending me small money from where she works in Abuja. I keep it at home, but my neighbor said it's not safe. He told me to bring it to bank, but I was afraid. I don't have big money like other people." Patricia appeared from behind the counter, having noticed the interaction. She pulled out a chair for the old man and gently took the box to help him set it down. "Sir, there's no such thing as too little money here. Every amount is important because it's important to you. Let's see what you have, and we'll help you open an account that works perfectly for your needs." Tonia brought a glass of water without being asked, placing it carefully beside the old man's weathered hand. "Take your time, sir. We're here to serve you. That's what we're for." Corner of the banking hall, near a potted plant that provided discreet viewing, Madame Clara Minsa stood watching. She had arrived unannounced, as was her habit now, dressed in her normal, elegant attire, but observing with the same sharp eyes that had seen through pretense before. She watched as Linda carefully counted the old man's coins, 2,000 naira in various denominations collected over months. She watched as Patricia explained account options with patience and clarity, never once suggesting the amount was insufficient. She watched as Tonia filled out forms for the old man's shaking hands and explained each document in simple terms. Most importantly, she watched the old man's face transform from apprehension to trust, from fear of rejection to the dignity of being valued. When he left 30 minutes later with his new account booklet and a smile that lit his entire face, Clara felt something shift in her chest, the weight she had carried since that test finally lifting. Frank appeared beside her, having noticed her presence. "They've changed, madam. Really changed. It's not performance anymore. It's genuine." Clara nodded, her eyes still on the 3 women who were now chatting warmly with other customers. "Grace works when judgment never could, Frank. I fired them to teach a lesson, but I rehired them to prove a point. That people can grow, that redemption is real, that second chances aren't just about forgiving the past, but about building a better future." She turned to leave, then paused. "Prepare their permanent contract papers. Full reinstatement to their original levels, effective next month. They've earned it." As Clara walked out into the Lagos afternoon, she thought about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A test designed to expose cruelty had instead revealed capacity for change. A public humiliation had become a private transformation, and 3 women who had laughed at poverty had learned to serve it with love. Behind her, the branch bustled with activity, customers being served with genuine care, staff operating with renewed purpose, and somewhere in the mix, an old man with a box of coins who would tell his neighbors that banks weren't scary places after all, that dignity could be found even in marble halls. that kindness still existed in the world. Sometimes the greatest lessons emerge not from our successes, but from our failures, not from our strengths, but from our moments of profound weakness. Linda, Patricia, and Tonia learned that respect is not a currency earned by wealth, but a fundamental right granted by our shared humanity. They discovered that second chances are not just mercies extended to the fallen, but investments in who we all can become. Madame Clara proved that true leadership isn't just about exposing wrong, but about believing in the possibility of right. Her experiment could have ended in simple retribution, but she chose the harder path, the path of redemption that requires faith in human capacity for change. If you've been moved by this story of humiliation, revelation, and transformation, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring African folktales and true human stories, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below telling us about a time when you witnessed kindness triumph over judgment, or when someone gave you a second chance that changed your life. Your stories matter, and they inspire us to keep bringing you content that touches hearts and transforms minds. Remember, every person you meet is carrying invisible burdens and fighting battles you cannot see. The way you treat them says nothing about their worth. It says everything about yours. Choose kindness, always. Choose grace. Choose to see the humanity in everyone who crosses your path, because you never know when you might be standing before greatness disguised as need. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of our community that believes in the power of stories to change hearts and transform lives. Until next time, may you be both the giver and receiver of unexpected grace.